December 26, 1900, the Flannan Isles, Scotland. A supply ship approached a remote lighthouse on a desolate island. The lighthouse keeper was supposed to signal their arrival. Light a lamp. Wave a flag, something. But there was nothing. No signal, no movement, just silence. The captain sounded the horn once, twice, 3 times. Still nothing. Something was very wrong. When the relief crew finally reached the lighthouse, they found the door closed. Not locked, just closed. They pushed it open and stepped inside. The lighthouse was empty, completely empty. 3 men had been stationed here, experienced lighthouse keepers, men who knew the dangers of island life, men who followed strict procedures. All 3 were gone. But here's what made it truly disturbing. The clocks had stopped. The beds were made. A meal sat half-eaten on the table. 1 chair was knocked over. And the door had been closed from the inside. 3 men had vanished from a locked lighthouse. And no one has ever figured out how or why. This is the story of the Flannan Isles lighthouse mystery, one of the most baffling disappearances in maritime history. The Flannan Isles are a group of small, rocky islands off the west coast of Scotland, remote, isolated, uninhabited, except for occasional lighthouse keepers. The islands have a dark reputation. Local fishermen avoided them. They called them the 7 Hunters. Ancient Scottish legend claimed the islands were cursed, haunted by spirits, dangerous to mortals. But the Northern Lighthouse Board didn't believe in curses. They believed in navigation, and ships needed a light to guide them through the treacherous waters around the Hebrides. In 1899, construction began on a lighthouse. It would be one of the tallest in Scotland, 75 feet high, built to withstand the most violent Atlantic storms. The lighthouse became operational in December 1899. It required 3 keepers at all times. They worked in rotation, 4 weeks on the island, 2 weeks on the mainland. It was hard, lonely work, but experienced keepers knew how to handle it. In December 1900, 3 men were stationed at Flannan Isles Lighthouse. James Ducat, age 43, the principal keeper. 20 years of lighthouse experience, married with 4 children, known for being meticulous and professional. Thomas Marshall, age 40, second assistant keeper, experienced and reliable, a quiet man who followed procedures to the letter. William MacArthur, age 29, occasional keeper, less experienced than the others, but eager and competent. These weren't novices. These were professional lighthouse men. They knew the dangers. They knew the procedures. They knew how to survive. On December 7, 1900, the 3 men began their shift. The supply ship Hesperus dropped them off with 4 weeks of provisions, food, water, oil for the lamp, everything they needed. The captain of the Hesperus, Jim Harvey, noted that all 3 men seemed in good spirits, healthy, ready for their rotation. "See you on the 26th, Harvey called as the ship pulled away. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. For the next 2 weeks, the lighthouse functioned normally. Every night the light rotated. Ships passing in the distance could see it clearly. The Flannan Isles light was doing its job. Then on December 15th, something changed. A passing steamer, the Archter, noted in its log that the Flannan Isles light was not visible. The captain assumed it was fog or weather interference. It wasn't uncommon for lights to be obscured temporarily. But the light never came back on. For 11 days, the lighthouse stood dark. Ships passing in the night saw nothing, just darkness where there should have been a guiding beam. On the mainland, officials grew concerned. The light was supposed to be maintained at all times. 3 experienced keepers wouldn't let it go dark, not unless something was seriously wrong. On December 26, 1900, the relief ship Hesperus set out for Flannan Isles. Captain Harvey was at the helm. With him was Joseph Moore, the keeper who would be relieving one of the men. As the ship approached the island, Harvey sounded the horn. Standard procedure. Let the keepers know the supply ship had arrived. No response. He sounded it again, louder, longer. Still nothing. "That's odd," Harvey muttered. "They should have heard that." Joseph Moore stared at the lighthouse. It looked normal, undamaged, but something felt wrong. A lighthouse keeper develops instincts, and his instincts were screaming danger. "Send up a flare," Harvey ordered. They fired a signal flare. It burst bright red against the grey Scottish sky. No one came to the landing. "I don't like this," Moore said. Neither did Harvey, but they had a job to do. Moore would have to go ashore. The sea was rough. Getting a boat to the landing was dangerous, but they managed. Moore and two sailors rowed to the concrete dock. The landing area looked normal. Ropes properly secured. Equipment in place, no damage, but no keepers. "Hello," Moore shouted. "To Cat Marshall." "MacArthur." His voice echoed off the rocks. No answer. The three men climbed the steep path to the lighthouse. 160 steps carved into the rock. Moore's heart pounded harder with each step. When they reached the lighthouse entrance, Moore paused. The door was closed. Not locked, just closed. He knocked. "Hello? Anyone here?" Silence. Moore pushed the door open. The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not just quiet. Absolute silence. No ticking clocks. No footsteps. No breathing. Nothing. "Hello?" He called again. The entrance was tidy. Coats hanging on hooks. Two of them. One was missing. Boots lined up neatly. Two pairs. One pair missing. That was strange. Why would one man leave without his coat and boots in December? Moore moved deeper into the lighthouse. The main room was neat, clean, everything in its place. The logbook sat on the table. He opened it. The last entry was December 15th, written in Duckett's handwriting. "Severe winds, storm lasting several days. All well. December 15th, 11 days ago. The same day the light went out." Moore's hands trembled as he turned the pages. Nothing after that. No entries for December 16th, 17th, 18th. Nothing. He climbed the spiral staircase to the living quarters. The beds were made, perfectly made, as if the men had never slept in them. In the kitchen, he found something that made his blood run cold. A meal, half-eaten, plates on the table, food still on them. A chair knocked over backwards, as if someone had stood up suddenly. One place setting, not three, just one. Moore touched the food, cold, hard. It had been sitting there for days. He continued searching. The lamp room at the top of the lighthouse. The lamp was off, out of fuel. That's why the light had gone dark. But why hadn't they refilled it? There was plenty of lamp oil in storage. Keeping the light burning was their primary job. Their only job, really. Moore returned to the main room. He noticed something else. The clock had stopped. At 8:45, morning or evening, he couldn't tell. He walked back outside. The two sailors were waiting nervously by the door. "They're gone," Moore said. "All three of them, just gone." "Gone where?" one sailor asked. "I don't know, but we need to search the island." The three men spread out. The island was small, less than 40 acres, mostly barren rock. There weren't many places to hide. They found nothing, no bodies, no signs of struggle, no evidence of where the men had gone. At the western landing, on the opposite side of the island from the main dock, they found something unusual. Damage, significant damage. A storage box bolted to the rocks had been ripped away. The iron railings were bent, twisted. Ropes were torn. "Storm damage," one sailor suggested, but Moore wasn't so sure. He'd seen storm damage before. This looked different, more violent, more deliberate. They returned to the lighthouse as the sun was setting. Moore didn't want to stay, but he had no choice. The Hesperus had already left. He was alone on the island. That night, Joseph Moore barely slept. Every creak of the building made him jump. Every gust of wind sounded like voices. He kept imagining three men walking through the door, soaking wet, silently staring at him, but no one came. In the morning, the relief ship returned with officials. From the Northern Lighthouse Board, they needed to conduct a full investigation. What they found would deepen the mystery even further. The official investigation into the Flannan Isles disappearance began on December 27, 1900. Robert Muirhead, the superintendent of the Northern Lighthouse Board, arrived personally. He'd known James Duckett for years, trusted him, respected him. He couldn't believe Duckett would simply abandon his post. Muirhead conducted a thorough search of the lighthouse. He documented everything. Every detail, every anomaly. His report would become one of the most analyzed documents in Maritime. The lighthouse interior was orderly, almost too orderly, as if the men had been expecting an inspection. The kitchen was clean, dishes washed and put away, except for the one meal on the table. The half-eaten meal with the overturned chair. Moorhead examined the food: potatoes, salted, meat, bread, a typical keeper's meal. Nothing unusual. But why was there only one place setting? Where were the other two men when this meal was being eaten? The beds were made, all three of them, tightly made with military precision, Ducat style. But if the beds were made, that suggested they'd disappeared during the day, not at night. The logbook provided more questions than answers. December 12th, severe winds. Storm approaching. December 13th, storm continues. Wind very high. Marshall very quiet today. December 14th, storm still raging. MacArthur crying. Ducat and I both praying. December 15th, storm ended. Ze calm. God is over all. That was the last entry. Moorhead read it several times. Something was wrong with these entries. First, the dates didn't match the weather. Moorhead checked with other lighthouses and ships in the area. There had been no major storm on December 12th, 15th. The weather had been rough, yes, but not unusually so. Second, the descriptions didn't sound like Ducat. Marshall very quiet. MacArthur crying. These were experienced men. They wouldn't be frightened by a normal storm. And Ducat and I both praying? That sounded like it was written by someone else. But it was in Ducat's handwriting. Or was it? Moorhead studied the handwriting more carefully. The entries for December 12th, 15th were shakier, less precise, as if written in haste or under stress. Something had frightened these men, something that made two experienced keepers cry and pray. But what? Moorhead examined the western landing, where Joseph Moore had found damage. The destruction was extensive. A toolbox weighing over 100 pounds had been torn from its bolted position. It was found 30 feet away, smashed against rocks. Iron railings designed to withstand the worst storms were bent and twisted. A massive piece of rock, estimated at over a ton, had been displaced. Ropes thick as a man's arm were shredded. This wasn't ordinary storm damage. This was violence on a catastrophic scale. But here's the strange part. The damage was localized. Only the western landing was affected. The lighthouse itself, less than 200 feet away, showed no damage. Not a single broken window, not a loose tile. How could a wave powerful enough to move a ton of rock and rip apart iron railings leave the lighthouse, completely untouched? Moorhead had no answer. He interviewed Joseph Moore extensively. Moore described exactly what he'd found. The closed door, the stopped clock, the half-eaten meal, the missing coats. What about the coats? Moorhead asked. You said 2 coats were hanging up. Yes, sir. Ducat's and Marshall's coats were on the hooks. MacArthur's was gone. 2 pairs in the entrance, 1 pair missing. Moorhead made notes. So MacArthur had gone outside wearing his coat and boots. That made sense. But Ducat and Marshall had apparently gone outside without their coats. In December. In Scotland. No lighthouse keeper would do that. Not unless it was an emergency. Not unless they had to go outside immediately. Tell me about the oilskins, Moorhead said. Moore frowned. Sir, the waterproof coats. The oilskins. Were they there? Moore thought for a moment. I don't remember seeing them. I wasn't looking for them specifically. They returned to the lighthouse. Moorhead checked the storage area where the oilskins should have been kept. 2 were missing. Only 1 remained. So MacArthur had taken an oilskin, and 1 other man had taken one, but the 3rd man hadn't. Why would 2 men put on waterproof coats but the 3rd not? Why would 1 man put on his regular coat but not an oilskin? The timeline didn't make sense. Moorhead tried to reconstruct what happened. Scenario 1. All 3 men went to the western landing together. A massive wave struck. All 3 were swept into the sea. But this didn't explain the closed door, or the half-eaten meal, or why the log entries stopped on the 15th. But the light stayed on until at least the 15th. Scenario 2. MacArthur went outside first. He was caught by a wave. Ducat and Marshall went to rescue him without taking time to put on proper clothing. All 3 were swept away. This was more plausible. It explained the urgency, the missing coats, the abandoned meal. But it didn't explain the strange log entries, or why MacArthur would go to the dangerous western landing instead of the safer eastern dock. Scenario 3. The men had some kind of mental breakdown. The isolation drove them mad. They walked into the sea deliberately. But Ducat had 20 years of experience. He'd worked in more isolated places than this. He knew how to handle the psychological challenges. And all three going mad simultaneously? Unlikely. Moorhead questioned everyone who'd seen the keepers before they disappeared. The crew of the Hesperus, the previous relief keeper, people on the mainland who knew them. Everyone said the same thing. The men were experienced, professional, mentally stable. There was no indication of problems. Local fishermen had a different explanation. They said the islands were cursed, that spirits lived there, that the three men had been taken by supernatural forces. The old one fisherman said, he lives in the caves. He don't like visitors. Moorhead dismissed this as superstition, but he had no better explanation. The Northern Lighthouse Board concluded their investigation in January 1901. Their official report stated the men were swept away by an abnormally large wave while attempting to secure equipment at the western landing during a period of severe weather. It was the only explanation that fit most of the evidence. But it left many questions unanswered. On the 15th, but the light continued burning. Someone had to be tending it. Why were the log entries for the 12/15th so strange? Why did they describe a storm that other sources didn't record? Why was there a half-eaten meal with only one place setting? Why was the door closed when the men presumably left in a hurry? And most puzzling of all, why did three experienced keepers all go to the western landing at the same time? They knew better. Standard procedure was to always leave one man inside the lighthouse. The official explanation satisfied some people, but others weren't convinced. Theories began to circulate, each trying to explain what the official investigation couldn't. Theory 1, murder. One keeper killed the other two, then jumped into the sea in guilt or panic. But there was no evidence of violence, no blood, no signs of struggle. And which keeper would be the murderer? All three were described as mild-mannered and stable. Theory 2, foreign spies. Perhaps agents from another country had landed on the island, killed the keepers, and stolen secrets about the lighthouse. But what secrets? It was just a lighthouse. And why would spies close the door behind them? Theory 3, sea raiders. Pirates or criminals had attacked the lighthouse. Again, nothing was stolen. The lighthouse contained valuable equipment and supplies. Why take three men but leave everything else? Theory 4, they were abducted, kidnapped by someone with a boat. But why? For ransom? No demands were ever made. For forced labor? Three lighthouse keepers weren't valuable enough to justify the risk. Theory 5, they abandoned their post deliberately, fled the island for personal reasons, but they left everything behind. Personal belongings, money, letters from family. And where would they go? They'd need a boat. No boats were missing from the island. Every theory had problems. Every explanation left questions. The mystery deepened instead of being solved. In the years following the disappearance, the Flannan Isles lighthouse mystery became legendary. Poets wrote about it. Singers composed ballads. Ghost story collectors added it to their archives. The story grew with each telling. Details were added, changed, embellished. But beneath the legend, a real mystery remained. Three men had vanished, and no one knew why. One of the most influential accounts came from Wilfred Wilson Gibson. He published a poem in 1912 called Flannan Isle. In his poem, Gibson imagined the relief keeper's experience. He added dramatic details. He described the lighthouse keeper's terror, their final moments. His poem included lines that would become famous. We seem to stand for an endless while. Though still no word was said, 3 men alive on Flannan Isle. Who thought on 3 men dead? Gibson's poem wasn't factual. He invented details, he created atmosphere. But his version became the version people remembered. He described the logbook as containing entries about a terrible storm, about the men hearing voices, about supernatural terror. In reality, the logbook was mundane until the final strange entries. But Gibson's dramatic version spread. Soon people remembered reading about the keepers, hearing voices, about them seeing things in the waves, about supernatural occurrences. These details weren't in the official report. They were poetic invention, but they became fact through repetition. The legend of Flannan Isles grew darker. Local storytellers claimed the island had always been cursed, that ancient peoples had avoided it, that Celtic priests had warned against building there. Stories circulated about previous deaths on the island, fishermen who'd landed there and never returned, ships that had wrecked on the rocks. Some said the lighthouse itself was built on a sacred site, that the construction had angered spirits, that the disappearance was revenge. One popular legend involved a sea monster, a creature that lived in the caves beneath the island. It would rise during storms and claim victims. The three keepers, according to this version, had gone to investigate strange sounds. The creature had dragged them into the sea. Another legend said the men had discovered something in the lighthouse, a cursed object or ancient writing, something that drove them mad and made them walk into the ocean. A more modern theory involved aliens. The men had been abducted by a UFO. The closed door and missing coats were evidence of how quickly they were taken. This theory gained popularity in the 1960s and 70s when UFO sightings were common, but it explained nothing. Why would aliens target three Scottish lighthouse keepers? In the 1990s, some researchers proposed a psychological explanation. They suggested carbon monoxide poisoning. Faulty equipment in the lighthouse could have leaked deadly gas. The men would become confused, disoriented. They might make irrational decisions. This would explain the strange log entries, the apparent panic, the abandonment of standard procedures. But investigations found no evidence of faulty equipment, and carbon monoxide poisoning would leave bodies. The men would collapse inside the lighthouse, not disappear from the island. Another psychological theory involved shared psychosis, a rare condition where delusions spread among a small group. Perhaps one keeper began seeing or hearing things. Under the stress and isolation, the others came to believe it too. They might have fled the lighthouse together, believing they were in danger. This theory has some support from the log entries. Marshall very quiet, MacArthur crying. These suggest psychological distress, but shared psychosis is extremely rare, and it doesn't explain why they would all leave the lighthouse simultaneously, or why the door was closed. The most scientifically supported theory remains the official one, a rogue wave. Rogue waves are rare but real. They're massive waves that appear seemingly from nowhere. They can be 2 or 3 times taller than surrounding waves. Modern research has confirmed that rogue waves exist. Ships have been damaged or sunk by them. People have been swept off docks and piers. A rogue wave could explain the extreme damage at the Western Landing. It could explain why all 3 men disappeared simultaneously. Here's a plausible reconstruction. December 15th afternoon. MacArthur goes to check the Western Landing equipment. Standard procedure after rough weather. He discovers damage. A storage box ripped loose. Ropes frayed. He returns to the lighthouse and reports the problem. Ducat makes the decision. They need to assess the damage properly. Secure any loose equipment before the next storm. All 3 men go to the Western Landing. This violates procedure, but Ducat wants the job done quickly. They're working at the edge of the rocks, assessing the damage, calculating repairs. A rogue wave appears, massive, 50 feet high. It crashes over the landing with devastating force. All 3 men are swept into the sea instantly. They don't even have time to scream. The wave recedes. The sea calms. The 3 men are gone, drowning in the freezing Atlantic. This explains most of the evidence. The men leaving without proper preparation. The extreme localized damage. The simultaneous disappearance. But it doesn't explain everything. The half-eaten meal? The overturned chair? The closed door? The strange log entries? Unless the timeline is different. Alternative reconstruction. December 15th morning. The log entries about the storm aren't describing weather. They're describing something else. Psychological stress. Personal conflicts. Fear of something. The men are on edge, anxious. Maybe they've seen something, heard something. Something they can't explain. That evening they sit down to eat. Only one man is eating. The others are too nervous. Or they've already eaten earlier. Suddenly they hear something. A crash, a cry. Something at the Western Landing. One man runs outside immediately. Doesn't stop for his coat. Emergency. The second man grabs an oilskin and follows. The third man hesitates. Finishes setting down his fork, stands so quickly his chair falls backward, grabs his coat and an oilskin, runs outside. In his hurry, he pulls the door closed behind him. Habit, training, always. Close the door against the wind. The three men reach the western landing. Something has happened. Equipment damage, or worse, then the wave hits. Unexpected, massive. All three swept away. The lighthouse stands empty, the meal abandoned. The door closed. This version fits more of the evidence, but it requires assuming something happened to draw the men outside. Something urgent enough to make them break procedure. What could that have been? We'll never know. The sea keeps its secrets. In 1971, Flannan Isles Lighthouse was automated. No more keepers were stationed there. The lighthouse operates remotely now, but people still visit the island. Tourists, historians, mystery enthusiasts. They walk through the empty lighthouse. Stand where Joseph Moore stood when he discovered the disappearance. Look out at the western landing, where the three men vanished. And they wonder, what really happened here? What terror made three experienced men break every rule? What force took them all simultaneously? The mystery endures because it's unsolvable. All the witnesses are dead. All the evidence is gone. All that remains is speculation and legend. But the story reminds us of something important. The ocean is vast, unpredictable, dangerous. Even in 1900, with all of human knowledge and technology, three men could simply disappear, without a trace, without explanation. It could happen again. It probably has happened. In remote places, on isolated islands, on ships at sea, people vanish. The ocean doesn't explain. The truth is lost, and we're left with mystery. So what really happened to the three keepers of Flannan Isles Lighthouse? After 120 years of investigation, analysis and speculation, we still don't know for certain, but we can make an educated assessment based on the evidence. The most likely explanation combines several factors. First, the weather. While there wasn't a major recorded storm on December 12th, 15th, that doesn't mean conditions weren't dangerous. The Flannan Isles are exposed to the full force of the Atlantic Ocean. Waves there can be massive even on relatively calm days. Rogue waves are unpredictable. They don't announce themselves. Weather records from 1900 were incomplete. Ships didn't always report conditions accurately. Isolated areas like the Flannan Isles might experience severe localized weather that wasn't recorded elsewhere. So there could have been dangerous conditions that didn't register as a major storm in official records but were still deadly. Second, human error. Even experienced professionals make mistakes. Standard. Lighthouse procedure required at least one keeper to remain inside at all times. This rule existed for exactly this reason, to prevent all keepers from being endangered simultaneously. But rules are broken, especially when there's pressure to complete urgent work, especially when men have worked together for weeks and develop informal procedures. Ducat might have made a judgment call. This will only take 10 minutes. We'll all go. Get it done faster. It's the kind of decision people make every day. Usually nothing goes wrong. This time something did. Third, the location. The western landing was known to be dangerous. Waves hit it with tremendous force. Equipment there required constant maintenance. But it was also necessary. Supplies sometimes had to be landed there when the eastern dock was inaccessible. Equipment stored there needed checking after storms. The keepers had to go there. It was part of the job. Combining these factors, here's the most probable sequence of events. December 15th, 1900. The weather has been rough for several days. Not catastrophic, but uncomfortable. Waves have been hitting the western landing hard. James Ducat is concerned about damage. He's responsible for maintaining all lighthouse equipment. If something breaks and isn't fixed, ships could be endangered. He decides to inspect the western landing. Thomas Marshall and William MacArthur will come with him. Get the job done quickly. All hands make light work. They finish lunch first, or at least MacArthur does. Maybe Ducat and Marshall had already eaten. Maybe they weren't hungry. MacArthur is eating when Ducat says, "Let's go check that western landing now." Marshall stands immediately. Doesn't need his coat. It'll only take a few minutes, he thinks. MacArthur sets down his fork. Stands so quickly his chair tips backward. Grabs his coat. This might take longer than a few minutes. Ducat makes the final log entry. Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all, he's reassuring himself, reminding himself that God watches over lighthouse keepers. They'll be fine. The three men walk out. Ducat pulls the door closed behind them. Habit. Always close the lighthouse door. They descend the 160 steps to the path. Follow it to the western landing. The sea looks calm. Relatively calm anyway. Waves are hitting the rocks, but nothing unusual. Nothing dangerous. They begin inspecting the equipment. Ducat checks the railings. Marshall examines the storage boxes. MacArthur looks at the ropes. They're focused on their work. Not watching the sea. Why would they? The sea is calm. Then without warning, a rogue wave appears. Rogue waves don't announce themselves. They don't build gradually. They just appear. A mountain of water rising from the ocean. By the time the men see it, it's too late. The wave crashes over the landing with the force of an avalanche. Thousands of tons of water. It rips the storage box from its bolted position, bends iron railings, tears ropes, displaces a massive rock, and sweeps three men into the sea. They don't have time to scream, don't have time to run. One moment they're standing on solid rock. The next moment they're underwater, tumbling, disoriented. The water is freezing. The North Atlantic in December is cold enough to kill in minutes. The men are wearing heavy clothing. It soaks up water, pulls them down, even if they could swim, and Lighthouse keepers in 1900 often couldn't. Swim, they wouldn't survive long. The wave recedes, the sea calms, the landing is empty. Three men are drowning, dying in the cold. Their bodies will never be recovered. The Atlantic is deep, the currents are strong. Back at the lighthouse, everything is as they left it. The meal on the table, the chair tipped over, the door closed. The light continues burning. There's enough oil for another day, then it goes dark. Days pass, then weeks. The supply ship finally arrives. Joseph Moore finds an empty lighthouse, a mystery with no solution. This is probably what happened. Not certainly, but probably. It explains the physical evidence. The damage at the western landing, the missing men, the abandoned lighthouse. It explains why. Experienced keepers would break. Procedure, urgency, efficiency, bad judgment. It explains the closed door, habit. Ducat pulling it closed without thinking. It explains the meal. Someone was eating, then they left quickly. But what about the strange log entries? Marshall very quiet, MacArthur crying, Ducat and I both praying. These don't fit the rogue wave theory. These suggest psychological distress, fear, something beyond normal weather concerns. There are two possible explanations. When the entries were misinterpreted. Marshall very quiet might just mean he was concentrating on work. MacArthur crying might be a mistranscription or misreading. Victorian handwriting can be ambiguous. Ducat and I both praying is strange, but maybe Ducat was religious. Maybe prayer was his response to any stressful situation. 2. Something else was happening, something we don't know about. Some source of stress or fear beyond the weather. Interpersonal conflict possible. 3 men isolated on an island for weeks might develop tensions. Illness possible. One of the men might have been sick, the others worried. Premonition. Some people claim to sense danger before it happens. Maybe Ducat felt something was wrong. Or maybe the entries are accurate. Maybe there was severe weather on December 12th, 15th. Maybe the official records missed it. Maybe the keepers experienced conditions that terrified them. And then, on December 15th, just when they thought the danger had passed, the rogue wave struck. We'll never know for certain. The only witnesses are dead. The evidence is incomplete. The truth is lost to time. But the most likely answer is the simplest. 3 men went to inspect storm damage. A massive wave struck. They were swept into the sea. No conspiracy. No supernatural forces. No mysterious madness. Just bad luck. Bad timing, and the ocean's indifference to human life. The Flannan Isles lighthouse still stands. Automated now. No keepers, no people. Just a white tower on a barren island. A monument to 3 men who vanished. Their names are recorded. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, William MacArthur. They're not forgotten. Every few years, someone writes a new article about them. A new book. A new theory. The mystery keeps them alive, remembered, honored. They were doing their job, keeping the light burning, keeping ships safe, and they paid the ultimate price. The Flannan Isles mystery teaches us several things. First, the ocean is dangerous. Even experienced professionals can be killed in seconds, even on relatively calm days, even when taking reasonable precautions. Second, mysteries don't always have satisfying answers. Sometimes the truth is mundane. Sometimes we never learn the truth at all. Third, legend grows from tragedy. The Flannan Isles story has been embellished, dramatized, and mythologized. But beneath the legend are 3 real men, 3 real families, 3 real lives ended. Both procedures exist for a reason. The rule about always keeping 1 keeper inside the lighthouse wasn't arbitrary. It was designed to prevent exactly what happened. But humans are fallible. We break rules. We take shortcuts. Usually nothing goes wrong. Sometimes everything goes wrong. The lighthouse keepers' families never got closure. They never recovered bodies, never learned exactly what happened. They were left with absence and questions. That might be the saddest part of the story. Not the death. Death comes to everyone. But the not knowing. The eternal uncertainty. Did they suffer? Were they afraid? Did they realize what was happening? Or was it over so quickly they didn't even have time to be scared? No one knows. No one will ever know. In 2000, on the 100th anniversary of the disappearance, a memorial was placed on the Flannan Isles. It lists the names of the 3 keepers. In memory of James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and William MacArthur, lighthouse keepers who vanished from this island. December 1900, their light still shines. That's a fitting tribute. Their light does still shine. The lighthouse continues operating. Ships are still guided safely past the dangerous rocks. The 3 keepers accomplished their mission. They kept the light burning. Even in death, their legacy endures. If this mystery fascinated you, hit that subscribe button. There are more unexplained disappearances waiting to be told. More lighthouse mysteries. More stories of people who vanished without a trace. What do you think happened to the 3 keepers? Was it a rogue wave? Something else? Let me know in the comments below. Next week, we're investigating another lighthouse mystery. The Smalls Lighthouse incident of 1801, where 1 keeper died and the other keeper had to live with the corpse for weeks, slowly going insane, talking to the dead body, until rescue finally came. You won't want to miss that one. Until then, remember, the ocean is vast, the dangers are real, and some mysteries are never meant to be solved. But the stories remain, as warnings, as reminders, as tributes to those who were lost. The 3 keepers of Flannan Isles are gone, but they're not forgotten. And every night the light still turns, still guides, still saves lives. That's their legacy. That's their memorial. The light that never dies.